Hi, Digestible listeners, and welcome back to the Digestible Podcast. I'm Stacy, one of your hosts, along with my sister Melissa. And here at the Digestible Podcast, we give you all the health and wellness information you need in an amount of time that your busy day can handle, and we make it easily digestible. Listeners, did you know that the incidence of youth onset type 2 diabetes has nearly doubled in the US since the early 2000s? Or that the prevalence of mental, behavioral, and developmental disorders among children aged 3 to 17 years has also increased at an alarming rate. Some are saying that it's simply an increase in diagnoses. Others say it's something wrong with our food, our environment, or is it the screens? Well, today we are so excited to have on Dr. Chris Turnpaugh. He is a functional medicine doctor that has been seeing kids and adults in his practice for the last 30 years. And not only can he attest to those changes in kids' health merely from his experiences treating patients, but he's also working with experts at the forefront of metabolic research to help us understand exactly what's been happening and how to fix it. So Missy and I were lucky enough to see Dr. Turnpaugh speak at this past year's conference for the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute. And we both knew immediately when he was talking that we had to have him on the show to talk to us and to you about our kids and what we can do to help them navigate this metabolic minefield we all live in. And friends, listeners, you're going to want to share this episode with everyone you know, your friends, your fellow parents, and please do so because when you share, we grow.
Yes. So because Dr. Turnpaugh also knows so much about metabolic health, we had a very long conversation with him that also included his approach to GLP-1s, inflammation, and autoimmune conditions in everyone, not just kids. So we split this into 2 digestible episodes. This week we're dropping the part about our kids, which you'll be hearing now. And next week it's all about metabolic health, the pitfalls of GLP-1s, and the path to better health, which we can all ascribe to. But first, let us tell you a little bit about Dr. Turnpaugh. Dr. Chris Turnpaugh is a leading figure in functional medicine with a career dedicated to addressing the root causes of chronic and complex health conditions. As the founder and president of Turnpaugh Health and Wellness Center, which has 5 locations and over 80 employees, he has cultivated a practice centered on integrative, patient-focused care that goes well beyond merely treating symptoms. He specializes in the use of advanced diagnostics and personalized treatment plans that he'll talk about a little bit today with us that integrate nutrition, lifestyle medicine, and functional lab analysis to support patients dealing with autoimmune disease, neurological disorders, thyroid issues, and other chronic conditions. He founded Turnpaugh Health in 1999 and was at the forefront of the functional medicine movement. So please listen, learn with us, and share with others. Enjoy this episode.
Hi, listeners. We are so honored to have Dr. Chris Turnpaugh with us today. So Missy and I were lucky enough to attend the PLMI conference this summer, which for those of you who don't know is the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute. And Dr. Turnpaugh was one of the speakers. And when he was speaking, Missy and I looked at each other and thinking to ourselves, like, the world needs to hear what he's saying. I know the clinicians are hearing what he's saying, but are the parents, the grandparents, the people that are around kids, adolescents, teenagers, are they hearing this message? So welcome, Dr. Turnpaugh.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're really excited to share your knowledge and your experience. You've been a practitioner for, is it 30 years?
31, yep.
31 years. You not only have the knowledge and understand the research, but you've had on-the-ground experience. You have several locations of your practice. I know you've got over, I think it's 5 locations, is that right, in Pennsylvania? Because there's just such a high demand for functional medicine solutions. And you've seen a lot of children. And we'd really love to hear what you've been seeing. And then maybe we could talk a little bit about how you're helping support the children and their families and getting them healthy.
Sure. Well, actually, and for a brief period of time, for about 4.5 years, I had a center just for neuroatypical kids. So kids that were struggling either on the spectrum or learning disabilities or anything. So I called it my time in the sandbox. So I got to see a bunch of adolescents and children, younger children, who were struggling and trying to figure it out. So I had it just for that. It was, and I call it my time in the sandbox. It was really my clinical insights as to how to help these kiddos a little bit better.
what were you seeing as far as like what was effective in helping them? What were they not doing that you were helping them shift to that were was it diet? Was it lifestyle? Like what was that? What were you
Yes,
seeing?
What's missing?
And what's missing? Sure.
that's kind of an interesting core question, right? Like and it's not one, it's kind of like a pillar. I equate it to like legs on a chair. If you fix one leg of the chair still falls over. Now you can fix one leg at a time, but you do want to focus on all of them. So certainly diet and, well, I'll just say environment plays, if we say the environment, because our genes haven't changed really. They don't change that, but our environment has changed dramatically. So what are the environmental changes that have happened? And other than the air we breathe, the biggest environmental change we have is the food that we eat. And of course, then the activity we do and what we're exposing ourselves to, or the phrase that I use, and I think it's out there, is the exposome. So, like we talk about the microbiome and different things, but the exposome is really what we're exposing ourselves to. And sometimes it's electronics, or we're exposing ourselves to poor sleep, or we're exposing ourselves to a sedentary lifestyle. And the immune system is kind of like the defense system, which is supposed to go into high gear. And sometimes it makes mistakes when it's overactive. And so when you have all these environmental exposures that the human body has really not seen, if you go back not that long ago, we didn't have the toxins and the chemicals and the electronics. And I mean, even if we go back, I kind of jokingly say, if we go back a long time ago, we didn't even have lights. So you went to bed when the sun went down, and you got up when the sun came up, unless you had a candle. So we've really changed and altered our environment dramatically in ways that the human body hasn't seen, and then pretty rapidly changed. And we're expecting it to adapt in a way that is commensurate with the way it was before, and it's just not possible. And I say it's not that these kiddos aren't the problem. It's they're struggling. I mean, they don't have a behavior issue. They have an issue that's because of their environment. So really want to look at, rather than punishing the child, being more aware of what is driving that child to dysfunctional behavior or moods or immune dysregulation or autoimmunity or all those things. So kind of keeping an eye on what might be driving it and why it might be driving it, rather than just kids are a problem.
Okay, and we don't want to demonize the parents, right? Because the parents love their children so much, and they want to give their kids everything possible to have them live healthy and successful lives. And so I would imagine when the kids come in, you have to figure out, and it could be a number of different things that the parents are just not even aware of. Things like with mood disorders or mood challenges, mood fluctuations, like, tempers or inability to focus or depression. What types of things are you seeing that are some of the causes of those? Well,
I think, you started off with a key point. We don't want to demonize the parent. The parents are doing the best that they can. They just need or could use some better tools in their tool bag. And the kids aren't giving us a hard time. They're having a hard time. They're having a hard time. So if we understand that these kids are not choosing to act out, they don't know what to do with their emotions and their immune system. So your child isn't giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And that starts with some compassion and empathy. And the parents aren't doing it wrong. They're doing the best that they can. So how do we empower the parents to say, what could I change? What differences could I make to change that exposure that these kids are having, and coming at it with a true understanding and meeting the parents where they are and having them move incrementally towards a different environment. I don't want to say better, because better means the way they're doing is wrong and shaming them, but an improved environment. And so just be aware that my child is being exposed to things I was never exposed to. Or what's fascinating to me is, I think I brought it up when I was giving that lecture, is something mom or grandma or dad or grandfather was exposed to. It affects the child or the grandchild generations later, even when they weren't exposed to it. So we're getting the summation effect of all these things. So if a mom is exposed to something and it changes how the body responds, that change will be manifest in the child even without the exposure to that chemical or toxin. So it is passing on generationally, and so we can do the best we can, and understand that parents aren't failing, they're just not understanding. And so can we clean up some of that exposure? Can we get to a cleaner environment? Can we use laundry detergent without fragrances? Can we use cleaner cleaning supplies? Can we have less toxicity in our life? Can we choose the foods that are the most toxic and choose those to be either organic or avoid them? It doesn't have to be also, you don't have to be a bazillionaire to do these things. So sometimes, like, I can't afford to get all of the organic and everything perfect. Well, there are foods that are less toxic to begin with. So what can I do on a dime? And how can I make small pivots instead of abandoning the lifestyle that I've had? How can I just make small changes over time that, there's a phrase we use, consistency doesn't seem like anything happens until one day it does. So if you're just consistently moving in the right direction, another phrase I use is better isn't the enemy of perfect. So just doing it better, doing it improved, really good isn't the enemy of perfect. So moving in a direction to help the environment and these kiddos. Can we make subtle changes? Can we reduce screen time? Can we get these kids active? Can we actually get them moving again? I think I heard a statistic maybe yesterday or the day before. 40% of elementary schools don't even have mandatory recess anymore. So,
Oh,
I mean, it's not a luxury to go to recess. It's a requirement.
right.
We used to have
Right.
kiddos that had like hyperactivity disorder, and the teachers, old school, would put them in the corner. Well, if a kid can't sit still and is a little anxious, what do you think happens when you put them in a corner where they can't see anything and they want to move? Said you'd have better results if you told them to run around the school 3 times and come back in and blow off some of that energy and some steam.
Right.
And remember, the kid isn't the problem. The child isn't the problem. They're having a problem. So how do we address that? How do we meet them, instead of, it's not a choice. They're not choosing to act out.
Do you recall an example of a patient that you have, with obviously not giving personal information, just sort of like a case study example of something that you dealt with a kid, and you were able to help them make those pivots and you saw a difference?
Yeah. So one of the children I took care of was, he was trying to be disciplined out of his behavior disorder, and so I sat with the mom, particularly in this case, and I said, "If would you discipline away a seizure disorder? If your child had seizures, would you beat it out of him? Would you ground him out of it? Would you send him to his room to get rid of his seizures? No, we have to look at this the same way. It's a condition that is affecting this child. It's not a choice that he's making." And then afterwards, I sat down with the child, and had a conversation. And I know you don't want to be this way. So there's a lot of, like, when they had bad behaviors, there was remorse afterwards. So clearly it wasn't like, I just want to be a bad kid. So I met him and I said, "Listen, I understand these are uncontrollable actions. Is that correct?" "Yeah, I don't know why I act the way that I do." And I gave him tools. "Would you like to be able to control that better?" "I really would. It's not who I want to be. When the emotions pass, I feel bad. I know I shouldn't have done the things that I did, and I really feel poorly." And I said, "Well, okay, let's work together and make some changes." So we cleaned up his diet. We did give him some specific supplementation to reduce what we'll call inflammation in the brain, or cross wiring. Gave him some activities where he felt like he could participate in his behavior. So instead of just being a passenger on his journey, we gave him goals. The goals are they can be activity goals, such as focus. I had him bounce a ball inside a 1 foot by 1 foot square and have him report back to me how many times he could do it. And he could see the increases, just subtle things where he was able to participate in his success and see, and then he's partaking in his achievements, and he's actually engaged in it. So it's not just take this pill and eat this food. Is what activity can you do? What what's your lifestyle that can actually encourage better behavior where you're experiencing that success? And we would celebrate every time you hit a new goal. It's exciting. And now they want to participate in their focus activities. They don't look at it as neurologic activities or neurologic, they look at it as a game. And that's where we want to kind of bring it in. Let's build the game, something that's fun, something that you want to do, not that you have to do. And his whole life changed. In fact, he was told he would never graduate high school, and he's currently in college and joining the military of all things, where he's very disciplined. So it's pretty impactful how
That's wonderful.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
and I see his mom, and she's like, I can't believe my child in second grade was told he's going to be in a rubber room and never graduate high school to see his achievements. So
Right.
So your kind of treatment is really like a 360 treatment, right? Like you're meeting with a family, you're saying, here's some activities, here's some supplements, here's some dietary changes, here's some lifestyle changes, and let's keep working together. Versus if that child went to just see a normal, like psychiatrist, let's say, they're going to be like, here's some medication, let's check back in 3 months.
yeah, and I think that we do look at things, and critically we'll have the psychiatrist say we just need to put them on this medication, and then we say in functional medicine, oh, medication is terrible. And I will tell you that there are times and places where to get them back on track, a short term of medication may be required or may be helpful. It may not be required, but it makes the journey a lot easier. But we want to be careful to say we're doing this at the comfort of a teacher. Like teachers have a thankless job, but that's part of their responsibility to deal with some adverse situations. It's not so every child sits there and has quiet and perfect behavior. So I think that if you look at it and say, we're just going to give you this medication and the child's behavior calms down, what other effect is that having? And what are we doing? We talked before we got on the show, we're accommodating them, but we're not remediating them, right? So as soon as they go off the medication, the behavior is going to come back. So we didn't remediate, we didn't fix anything. We just accommodated their problem. Or if you have a child who has extra test taking time all the way through college, my son just graduated, my oldest just graduated from law school, and he was saying over 50% of his class had accommodations for test taking. 50% at the highest level. And again, my son has a few personality traits, shall we say, where absolutely he might have been able to get those accommodations. And we discussed it, and he said, Dad, life doesn't give me those accommodations. When I get out and I go into practice, so am I going to say to my clients, I need an hour and a half to do an hour's worth of work? So it's a disservice to just accommodate. We also need to remediate. And that's where sometimes medications are accommodating, but we need an off-ramp. We need to get these kiddos to where they don't need to rely on this stuff, or they don't have extra time built in, because that's not how the real world works. It doesn't work to give us extra time to get a job done. So
Right.
That's
true. So you had mentioned that there was a huge surge in type 2 diabetes and obesity in children, and autoimmune diseases were up 300% in adolescents, which is just frightening. Let's pivot to what is going on.
Well, first of all, let's acknowledge that something is going on. So the worst thing we can do is put our head in the sand and say, oh, that's not true, that's not true. These are very, very well understood phenomena going on. So a 300% in autoimmune reactivity and autoimmune diseases, something is going on. So that's the first acknowledgement, is that something is going on. And these lead to autoimmune diseases, but also very closely linked to behavior disorders, especially in adolescence when hormones are changing. You're seeing the most rapid change in the body happening, and new emotions and all kinds of things, with a dysfunctional regulatory system or immune system, right? So the immune system is a regulatory system. And when that goes awry, is it any wonder we're seeing these behavior issues and disease processes and obesity? And so we say, where could that be coming from? Well, what has changed? And well, it's genes. It's not genes. Well, it's better diagnostics. It is not better diagnostics. I can tell you 100%. The Mind Institute in California did this. It is not just better diagnostics. Maybe a little. They said up to 20% could be better diagnostics, but that's 80%
Right.
increased all causes. So, and then we said, well, what has changed? Well, what has changed is a lot of things, but certainly our highly processed foods and our chemicals in our foods. We have, it's become more aware now, which I'm grateful for. We have 10,000 chemicals in our foods that are illegal in every other country. So now, is it all causing problems? I don't know, but it's suspect, right? So we use
Right.
Occam's razor, like what's the most likely thing? Well, how about the 10,000 chemicals that we put into our food supply?
That
Uh,
weren't there, 50, 60 years ago when people weren't experiencing
no,
these
and the
conditions, right?
conversation goes many times. Well, my grandfather, my parent comes in with a child, and they say, well, my parent didn't eat that way. I said, yeah, they actually did, because 65 years ago, they didn't have the opportunity to get poisoned with all the things that are in the environment today. Throw
Right.
on top of that, they didn't have a cell phone that they were tied to. They didn't have the video games they were tied to. And by the way, your grandfather worked on the farm, so guess what he did every day? He got up at the crack of dawn and worked his butt off. So they were moving, they were active, they were engaged in life. They also we have, with all the phenomena going on, we have less community. Community is online, so there's less personal engagement. There's less emotional accountability, right? So you can say whatever you want on a chat with no emotional accountability because it's some ghost saying something to you, and you see an increase in online bullying. People are saying things that they would never say to a person's face, but they're saying it
Right.
online. So we don't have
Yeah.
a true sense of community like we did before.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a lot to tackle
Yeah.
to make us healthy, to keep us healthy. Where do we start?
So,
I guess that's a
so
sort of a hard question to answer, but that sounds like a lot. So our environment has changed. How we relate to other people has changed. Our food has changed. But you had mentioned a pivot. Pivots are important. We talk about that too. It can feel overwhelming, especially if you have a child who has any of these issues, like insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, like depression, neurological issues, like autoimmune. Sort of like, where do you start? Where would you have somebody start?
well, I would have a preference and a bias of where I would like them to start. But where can they start? Well, what is feasible to them? So,
Okay.
a when I used to deal with children on the spectrum, it wasn't about dragging them into my world. It was about going into their world, seeing where they were living, and guiding them back to, or more towards, the world we live in. And so the same is true when you meet with someone. Where are you living? What's the easiest pivot point? Can we get some activity in? Can we get better sleep hygiene? I would preferentially start with diet because, again, it's a big exposure. Can we clean up that diet? I tell patients, a lot of chemicals are labeled as obesogens, which means when you eat this chemical, it makes you obese. It's actually called an obesogen. And these
Yeah.
chemicals are called endocrine disrupting chemicals, which means they're messing with your hormones and your endocrine system. By definition, obesogens and endocrine disrupting compounds, what on earth makes you think that anything positive is going to come out of that when you're going through those changes that you're going through adolescence? So I would say we can start with diet and clean it up. But if that seems too big of a hurdle, I'll kind of put it out as a softball. But where are you? Can we get some more activity? We can really get some more activity, and we can really change sleep. We can change screen times. And that is directionally correct, but incomplete, where then we can use that as, can we get, my kid won't change his diet. Well, can he bounce a ball on square for? So what can he,
Right.
where's he willing to participate to gain some
Right.
trust?
Right. One of
Um,
my kids will, because she wants her screen so bad, I can say, well, I first would like you to do this. And it
mhm.
usually involves her moving her body or doing a chore, um, or why don't you go find a vegetable or a fruit for your snack? Then you can have your screen. And that's something. Is that
No,
something?
well, you have to find a hook, right? You have to find a hook to get into. So my
Right.
kid, whatever, my child has to play video games. Well, can he stand while he plays the video game? Can he make subtle changes? Can he be active? Can at least be standing rather than sitting? Those are not going to. Those, by the way, aren't enough. Like if you just did that, it's not enough.
Right.
But it's a way. It's an entry point, right? It's like an
Sure.
entry point to get into change. So how can we pivot a little bit to pivot a little bit more to pivot a little bit more? Um, and by the way, if these kids aren't driving yet, they're eating what you're feeding, right? So if they're
Right.
not going out,
Right.
they're eating
Once
what
they're teenagers, it's
Oh
like
my gosh.
I had
you've
a
lost a
kiddo
lot of
once.
control.
Yeah, I had a kiddo once on the spectrum, was like 4 or 5, and the mom's like, "All he'll eat is grilled cheese and chicken nuggets." I'm like, "That's all you're feeding him." The kid doesn't have a choice. It does not have a choice. And the mother would say, "Well, he'll starve himself." I'm like, well, "Okay, well, maybe. I mean, I've seen some unique behaviors. Can you clean that up? Can you clean up your chicken nuggets and grilled cheese? I mean, can you clean up what you're giving him, and change that?" So we want to
Yeah.
empower patients not to punish, but to just basically enable them to make subtle changes and realize they're not doing it wrong. Once you know better, you do better, and then it does become incumbent upon the parent. Once you know better, like, it's too hard. I have a child who has Fragile X, a genetic disorder, and we had him at Hopkins, and of course he has major food reactions to gluten, major food reactions to gluten. So he's high functioning for Fragile X. We had him down at Kennedy Krieger, which is at Johns Hopkins, and we have 4 children. He says, "You have 4 children?" And I told him, when he eats gluten, he drools on himself. He can't understand a word he says. His ears get bright red. He's
Wow.
clearly having an immune reaction, right?
Right.
And so I tell brilliant doctor, number 2 in the world, Fragile X, he was at Kennedy Krieger at the time, and he says, "Yeah, I see you're gluten free. You have 4 children. That's hard. I just feed them gluten." I was appalled,
Wow.
and I said, he says, "It's really hard." And I said, "It's really hard? Not being able to speak and drooling on yourself and having your mind not working." So I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
what's really hard is lowering your IQ by 20 points. That's hard. What isn't
Right.
hard is making these changes. So I
Right.
think it seems insurmountable, and when I was a little bit harsher, more edgier, and I used to give lectures for parents, I said, if you're feeding your kids these foods, you're committing child abuse. Just,
Yeah.
I mean, I was harsher and edgier at the time, but I said, if you know these things are detrimental to your child, and
Right.
you're doing it anyway, it's kind of
Yeah.
abusive behavior, isn't it? So that hit parents hard. I stopped because it was a little too hard, but know better,
Yeah.
do better. You want your child to get better. You can't discipline out a poor diet. You can't punish out a poor diet. You can't,
Yeah.
um, and then you're going to have what we call reproach behavior. You're not allowed to go out. You're not allowed to see your friends. You're not allowed to have any fun for something that you don't have any control over.
So I have a 10-year-old. When one of her favorite foods for a lot of years were these Morningstar chicken nuggets. They're soy based. They're not real meat. And when I first learned about glyphosate, and realized that Morningstar wasn't organic, and I knew that there was glyphosate all over these nuggets, I said to her, "I'm so sorry, I can't feed you these anymore."
Right.
And I told her like a little bit at her level what glyphosate was, and we tried all these other types of, chicken nuggets, and she didn't like any other options. And she still to this day, like 4 years later, will say, "Mom, you took away my chicken nuggets." But you know what? I did it, and she's okay. And we found other things. And there's nights where we sit down to dinner and we say, "This is what's for dinner." It's salmon and rice and a vegetable. And when we first started doing that with them, because I used to feed them, I used to accommodate them. I used to feed them what they'd eat.
Right.
When I stopped doing that, they would just stare at the plate. I'd put a little bit of food. You don't have to fill up if, just take a few bites. And at first they sort of boycotted, and I was like, oh my God, my children are going to starve. But eventually they realized, if I don't eat dinner, I'm hungry.
Right.
And this is what's for dinner. And so that they started eating it, and they find ways that they like to eat it, and they
Which is very old school, by the way. That's how our grandparents grew up eating. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that's how my husband grew up eating. Nobody was making
really
extra meals for anybody.
And I grew up eating processed foods, so this was hard for me to acknowledge and then make the shift and then tell them I'm sorry, but this is what's for dinner. I felt like I was being mean to them.
I
But
grew
it's
up
just
on, I
also,
grew up on very processed foods as well, and we decided that our children were going to eat what we were eating. We weren't going to make special meals for them, and that's the other piece I'll tell families: if you're changing the diet for one of the children, change it for the household so they don't feel like they're the outcast. They don't have shame that they're eating something different. And we also, in my household, with two words we're not allowed to use is starving. I said, you don't know what starving is. I'm starving. You're not starving. There are children starving all over the world, and you're not one of them. And need, a starving child needs food, but you don't know what need is. You have wants, but you needs. And if you're hungry, you'll eat. So if a child says, I'm hungry for this, and you give them something else and they say, well, I'm not hungry for that, then you're not really hungry, because I tell you right now, a starving child will eat whatever you give them. So,
right.
so just perspective, like, is it a want? Is it a craving? Or is it a true need? If you're hungry, you'll eat.
Right. And I do like to say, well, if you want a choice, you can also eat the carrots that are in the fridge or an apple.
Well, and that's one of the tricks is, instead of say, you're hungry, what do you want? You're hungry, you can choose this or this. So you don't make it like we're having just this, but you give them a choice, and then they feel empowered. I chose this. I chose this.
Yeah, it's hard to be a short order cook.
Clean food is the core. Clean food, clean water. It's constantly bombarding our immune system with not just toxins, but these things also. If you so the immune system doesn't recognize. I'll use this example. Like, the immune system doesn't recognize. It doesn't. These are my antibodies, right? So it doesn't. They attack things. So you make an antibody to a bug. You make an army against a bug. Goes attacks it. You don't really make antibodies to things like a chemical, because it doesn't. It has to recognize the organic piece of it, and there's really no organic piece to a lot of these chemicals. But the chemical then will come in contact and bind to human tissue. So you get a chemical. I'll pick an easy one, kind of mercury, right? So mercury is it has a lot of toxicity to it, but you don't develop antibodies to it. But when that binds to human tissue, now the immune system says, well, I can recognize that as foreign. But what does it recognize as foreign? The self piece. So this is where a lot of autoimmunity comes in. The chemical will bind to human tissue, like albumin or proteins. And now you have this foreign looking thing. It can't make an antibody or an army against the chemical, right? Because it doesn't know how to do that. So it makes the only thing it can an army against the only thing it knows, and that's the organic piece, which is you. So now you see an autoimmune reaction based on a chemical environment, right? So we see how the chemical doesn't cause autoimmunity. It really does. It doesn't in a petri dish, because you don't make an antibody and antibodies to self is the definition of autoimmunity. So how can we get there? Well, there's a couple ways, but one of the ways is you actually have the chemical binding to human tissue, and then you attack that. The other way is you have just a minefield of inflammation where your own tissue is breaking down, and the immune system says, I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to start to attack that self tissue, that human tissue.
That's a really good explanation of how autoimmune works.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think it's like one of those very broad terms that for most people, they're like autoimmune, but they don't really understand what's happening in the body or why.
I'll piggyback on that a little bit, right? So when you have this overwhelmed immune system, it's hard to even fight infections, right? So we blame the viruses and the infections. So when you get a bug that comes in, the immune system eats the bug. And then if it's overwhelmed, it just ruptures. And now you have self tissue and bug tissue in the same, we'll call it debris field, same minefield, right? So now the immune system comes in and says, should I attack the bug or should I tolerate the self tissue? Well, both of those tissues are in the same minefield. So we get confusion now from an infection, because when the immune system can't work correctly, it has self tissue with pathogen tissue in the same area, and there's confusion where it says, I'm just going to attack, and it attacks self tissue as well as pathogen tissue. All of that is from an overwhelmed, incorrectly functioning immune system, which can be precipitated from chemicals, poor diet, overwhelmed, lack of sleep, lack of
Mm-hmm.
robust exercise, lack of sunlight, just sunlight alone. I think I said at that conference, they say, oh, red light therapy is woo woo. And then I went through the whole pathway about how sunlight actually improves our mitochondria, which improves the energy of all of our cells. We know exactly how it works. It improves blood flow to the brain, which makes it work better. And when these systems are stressed, we don't get the sunlight, we get the toxicity, we have drops in serotonin, we have drops in dopamine, we get aberrant behavior, we get anxiety, we get depression. And these are mood disorders that we try to medicate away or discipline away, and we're not getting to the underlying piece of why it's even there.
Okay, so sunlight can help with that too. The red, is that the red light though? Is it the red light in the sunlight?
Yeah, well, it's infrared, far infrared. It's that. It basically think of this thing as a mitochondria, and it has like a cog in the wheel, right? A nitric oxide molecule on complex 3. You don't need to know that, but that's just where it is. And then so the sunlight kind of vibrates that off, and then it allows the engine to start, and that piece that came off drives blood flow. So it's a double win, right? You get your engine started, and you're getting blood flow to tissue just from sunlight exposure. So it could be
the nitric oxide on the mitochondria is like a plug, and if it's shooken loose, it allows the mitochondria to function better, but then it also improves blood flow because nitric oxide does that for blood flow.
Correct. So think of it as just sitting there waiting to be told to do its job, to blood flow, and when it's not told to go do its job, it's actually inhibiting the mitochondria from functioning. You don't allow the engine to go. So all you have to do is really, the answer is sun exposure or red light therapy. But again, if we're talking about, I can't afford a big expensive red light. Can you afford to walk outside and get some sunshine?
Right.
So, if your metabolism isn't working correctly, one of the core components is mitochondria, right? So mitochondria are essential for producing the energy. And then when that cell doesn't work correctly, it actually will go through, it's like, hey, I'm not working correctly. Can you kind of clear me out, right? You get a senescent cell or a cell that's like a zombie cell. And there's other mechanisms, but so you're actually telling the immune system to work a little bit harder. You're telling the immune system to do some different things. And the immune system doesn't have the energy to do what it, so you're asking an overtired immune system to work harder. So metabolism plays a huge role in the immune regulation, immune function, and brain health. The brain is 2% of our body, but uses 20% of our energy. So if you have a metabolic issue or a mitochondrial issue, your brain is going to probably take the biggest hit because brain and liver use a ton of energy, but the brain is arrogant. It's only 2% of the body uses 20% of the energy. And if it's not functioning correctly because of metabolic issues or mitochondrial issues, you're going to see behavior issues.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our interview with Dr. Turnpaugh. I'm so grateful for practitioners like Dr. Turnpaugh for helping us understand why our kids are struggling and talking about putting real remedies to task, not just treating the symptoms. We loved learning from him on the Digestible podcast, and we hope you did too. Dr. Turnpaugh has formulated a number of supplements for overall health and longevity. Support your journey towards holistic well-being with Dr. Turnpaugh's Turnpaugh Foundationals, a carefully selected lineup of 8 essential supplements thoughtfully curated by the team at Turnpaugh Fundamentals to bolster your overall health. From fortifying your immune system's defenses and fueling sustained energy to extinguishing inflammation and enhancing cognitive function, Turnpaugh Foundationals encapsulates the core pillars of wellness and addresses the key aspects of your body's vitality. Shop now at shop.turnpaughhwc.com. If you liked today's episode, please share us with others. It's the best compliment you can give us. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at info@digestiblestrategies.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and remember, don't panic, just pivot. The content shared on this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. We are not medical professionals, and the views expressed here are not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any health conditions. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider before making any health-related decisions.